standing to forgive you time and time again. It was almost like I was in some kind of movie and I was rehearsing my role over and over. And I would step into the role of the prodigal, and the director would say, Mike returns to God after careless living, take 5,247. And I step in and I go through my part again, and I've worn this path out that I trod back to God. And yet God is in a scene that says, Mike comes back to God, take one. And that's the way God sees it. We're coming back with a clean slate, with his open arms. And the parable tells us that the father runs to meet the son. It's not that he's out doing something and when the son comes home and the father hears and just says, oh, he's back. He's sitting on the porch waiting for us to come back to him. And when he sees us coming afar off, he runs to us and meets us. That's a beautiful parallel to another phrase in Scripture where it says, while we were sinners, Christ died for us. The motion is on the Father's side to us, even when we are in our distant living. Now, it's easy when you look at something I talked about 2 weeks ago, some of the story of my life, to see in that, yeah, Mike, you were the prodigal, no doubt. But there are many, many things that separate us from God. Some of our habits, some of our traits find us off distant from God and need that reason to return. And no matter what it is that we come back with, God is standing there with open arms for us. And it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. It's one that all of us take to heart. And at the bottom line, it's a picture of our salvation, that at some point in our life, we saw where our life had been leading us. Our heart was crying out that there's got to be something more. And so we turn and we come back to God, and he puts us into his house, and we become his children like we had never been before. But you have to look at the context. Before I go into what the parable's about, the real intent of it, let me say this. When you grew up, and when I grew up, we heard the story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. And as we get older, we learn that George Washington really didn't chop down the cherry tree. But it was almost like we would rather have that memory, that be true, and that our country be founded on the shoulders of this great man of integrity who never did anything wrong. It's also about learning that your parents are Santa Claus, which I did last year. I had never known. But when I started getting clothes for Christmas, I was kind of suspicious. Sometimes when we learn something about something else, it takes away the romanticism of it. It takes away what really meant something to our heart. And I want it clear that this part of the parable is so meaningful to us. And Jesus told this parable, and he wanted us to hear this part of it. But there was another reason he was telling this story. If you look in the context of where this was told, there are three parables that he tells once in a row, all in a row. And they come on the heels of the Pharisees saying, look, he's eating with sinners. These people really shouldn't be there. If he was a great rabbi and teacher and prophet that everybody is saying in, he wouldn't be sitting with these kind of people. And so Jesus tells three parables. The first one is about a shepherd who has 100 sheep, pretty much average flock for the day. And he loses one of the sheep. So he leaves the flock and he goes out looking for it. And he finds the sheep and he brings the sheep back and he calls all his friends and neighbors and says, let's have a celebration. I lost the sheep and I found it. And now I have it back in my flock. And Jesus is telling this story to a group of people, the people who were lost, the sinners, the drunks, the prostitutes, whoever was sitting there with him sharing a meal. And he's saying to them, this is what it's like. But he's also poking his finger right in the eye of the Pharisees. He's saying, you of all people who know God, who should be the face of God, you of all people should be celebrating when these people come back and want to have a relationship with God. It doesn't stop there. he goes on to the next story. He says a woman had 10 coins, and she loses one of the coins. Well, this is a little bit bigger impact. One sheep out of 100, one coin out of 10. He tells the same story. She loses the coin. She goes looking for it frantically, looking through her whole house. Finally finds it. Calls all her friends and neighbors and said, had lost one of my coins, but I found it. It was lost and now it's found. Let's celebrate. This is an occasion to celebrate. And he's telling it to those people who are distant from God. He wants his disciples to hear it too, to get an understanding of who God is and how he searches for us. And at the same time, right into the eyes of the Pharisees. You, of all people, who should be the face of God in the world here, you should be celebrating, of all people, when somebody like this is lost and comes back to God. Well, that's two stories. And now we're coming in for the real punch. The man had 2 sons. And he tells the story of the son going off and coming back and the father welcoming him. These people that he's sharing the meal with were those prodigals, literally. And now they were coming back to God. And I can almost picture Jesus in this scene where he had been the first time kind of rubbing his beard and telling about the sheep and kind of having his eyebrows raised, maybe a little mischievous grin on his face. And he tells this, and they know what he's talking about. Then the look probably gets a little more stern as he's telling the story of the woman who lost the coin, and kind of looking out of the corner of his eye and making sure that they get the message. Then I can imagine Jesus turning right at them and looking and telling the rest of this parable. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come home, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf." But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, "Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandments at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours comes home, he who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you kill the fatted calf for him." And the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found." And you can almost sense just the quiet that happened then as he was talking straight to them so that they got that message. Here were the people that were your brothers and your sisters. You want to call them as someone who is not really worthy of coming into the Father. But they are people just like you are. And you, of all people, you who claim to know God, who should be the face of God, here, you are the one that isn't celebrating. Well, that's pretty powerful stuff. And there's a lesson there not only for the Pharisees, but there's a lesson for us. That judging spirit, that bitterness, that resentment, that selfishness. That's the word that really comes out there on the elder son, that 4-letter word, self. All of this is about me now and not about those people who came back to a relationship